Welcome back to another episode of Flyin with Best Fight Picks. I am your host, Flyin Browne. This special UFC 187 edition of the podcast is proudly brought to you by Unique Kennels, the official bulldog of MMA, raising affordable and healthy bulldogs for the last 30 years. Look him up on Twitter at UniqueKennels71 and also on Instagram, instagram.com/Unique Kennels. If you haven't had your daily dose of Q in yet, go there to get that in right now. With me, as always, the man who will be your financial advisor for one of the year's premier fight cards and the best fight analyst in the entire mixed martial arts community, Daniel Levy with MMA Thought and Best Fight Picks. Find him on Twitter at MMA Thought and also at Best Fight Picks. Daniel, you said last week you were riding an insane 17-bet win streak. Before we get into UFC 187, can you tell us if you kept your streak alive?
We kept the streak alive indeed. We're at 18 straight fights now. Our 8-unit play on Frankie Edgar successfully cashed. And like I said last week, it's normally against my policy to play the chalk, as they like to say, but Frankie Edgar's a UFC future Hall of Famer, so it almost seemed like a no-brainer to lay the juice on him.
And also last week you had mentioned possibly putting 2 units on Luke Barnett, but you passed on that, right?
I did pass on it because Mark Munoz, to our surprise, he came out looking super shredded at the weigh-ins, and that's usually the times when he has success inside the octagon. So I passed, and Mark Munoz ended up leaving on a high note.
That is fantastic for Mark Munoz, and that's one of those things that the listeners are going to want to pay attention to, the weigh-ins. Frequently, when you are thinking of making a bet on a fight, you wait until weigh-ins to make your final decision. I don't want you to be too specific right now, but are there any fights on this card, UFC 187, that you will be waiting to place units on until you've seen the weigh-ins?
On this card, no, but on many of the cards, yes. On this one, I already know what I'm going to bet on, and I can't wait to get into it.
Me neither. And when we finally make it to Saturday, UFC 187 will start on UFC Fight Pass at 6:30 Eastern and 3:30 Pacific Time. The men who received the honor of getting this event started will have weighed in at 125 or 126 pounds. After having won the first 9 fights of his professional career, the 23-year-old Justin Tank Scoggins comes into this flyweight bout sharing a 2-fight losing streak with his opponent, Josh the Gremlin Sampo. Scoggins is a southpaw fighter and will assume the role of the favorite at minus 370 to Sampo's plus 310. These men are listed as having identical reach despite Scoggins having a 3-inch height advantage. The loser of this fight might be leaving the UFC. How do you see it playing out?
Scoggins is a really, really talented prospect. He's a karate fighter. He likes to switch his stances, throw a lot of side kicks, and lately he's actually been transitioning his strikes to his takedowns very, very effectively. When in his UFC debut, he knocked out Richie Vasulik in the first round, and then he 30-27 Will Campuzano, and then after that he fought top 10 Dustin Ortiz and fought him to a very, very close split decision. Many people thought it could have gone either way. And then right after that, he fought John Moraga, who's a top 5 guy, and he was giving Moraga a run for his money, but Moraga's technical proficiency on the ground came to his favor as he tapped out Scoggins with a guillotine choke. But take nothing away from Scoggins, he looks very, very solid. Now his opponent, Josh Sampo, he's more of a grappling-based fighter. He's the kind of guy that's opportunistic. He looks for submissions. I personally don't think that Scoggins is going to give him any opportunity here, and I think that Scoggins is going to be able to get the victory here. Now the price, minus 370, is definitely a little high, so you can't play it straight, but I do think that you could potentially throw in Scoggins to your parlays because I do think he's going to get the job done. Now, one thing you got to note, Scoggins normally trains out of ATT, but for this fight, he moved his camp over to Sarah McMahon's gym, so I'm very curious to see what kind of improvements he's made to his game. Against Moraga, it's not like he was looking bad. He just made one little technical mistake with his head placement when he got the takedown, and he got choked out. Now, I don't think that Sampo has the submission skills of Moraga, but he is a submission guy. Sampo, he went in there against Makhachev. He went 3 hard rounds. He also choked out Ryan Benoit, the guy that just knocked out Sergio Pettis. And Sampo, he also fought Patrick Holohan. He got dropped in the first round with an uppercut, and then he subsequently got choked out. So his UFC run hasn't been the best by any means at all, and I definitely think Justin Scoggins is going to pick up a victory here.
So we're not putting straight units on Scoggins. You could possibly put him in a parlay. And I think since Scoggins, I think he's going to get a finish over Sampo. And these 125-pound guys often land a lot of strikes. It's a really fast-paced fight. I'm going to put Scoggins on my Kountermove team as he is only $4,900 of a $25,000 salary cap on the Kountermove.
Yeah, he definitely will make a good addition to your Kountermove team. You just have to watch out because there is a chance that he will go to decision, and Kountermove favors the finishers, but there's also a chance he finishes it. He's so young. He's 23 years old. He's getting better every single fight, and I think this might be his coming out party.
After his coming out party, we move to the second of 3 fights scheduled to be broadcast on UFC Fight Pass. We move up 30 pounds to the lightweight division for a bout between UFC newcomers Islam Makhachev is a near carbon copy of Nurmagomedov, who will bring a perfect 11-0 professional record to the octagon as a minus 335 favorite over Leo the Lion Kuntz. We need to be sure to pronounce his name Kuntz, other than the other way you could say it because that might be bad. But despite owning a 5-inch reach advantage, Kuntz will be a plus 275 underdog to the Russian. I am sensing that one of these men will be on a few Kountermove teams. Which man and why?
Islam. But let's talk about his opponent, Leo Kuntz, for a sec. Kuntz has decent power. He throws straight punches, and he's got some hard leg kicks. The issue with him is his takedown defense is extremely poor. Now, in some of his fights, he has gotten taken down, but he'll get right back up. I don't think that'll happen in this fight, but at least he's shown that he knows he has to get back up. He doesn't try to submit you off his back. And also, he's gotten dropped in fights, but he shows a lot of heart. So he's not the most technical guy in the world, but he definitely comes to fight. And he actually fought on a season of Tough, but he got knocked out by Sam Alvey in devastating fashion. But as we all know, if Sam Alvey hits you on the chin, you're going down. Now, as far as his opponent, Islam Makhachev, this guy's a Russian Sambo fighter. He trains with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he basically has that prototypical Sambo style. I mean, he's from Dagestan, and this guy's a combat sambo world champion, a 3-time combat sambo Russian national champion, and this guy looks to suplex you, full mount you, ground and pound you, and armbar you. So I think Islam is going to dominate this fight. Now, he'll either get a 30-27 decision, or he may even ground and pound him for a TKO, potentially get an armbar. But either way, I definitely have Islam Makhachev getting the victory, and I think he's a very good parlay leg.
So no straight pick, but you could parlay leg him. And also, I think you're putting him on your Kountermove team, right?
I am putting him on my Kountermove team.
When I was watching fights from Islam, I noticed that his last few fights were in a 6-sided ring, and he was able to get takedowns very effectively with that, even though the ring kind of hindered those takedowns. And I think that the cage is going to be really favorable for him.
Yeah, he's an absolute beast. I mean, he tries to suplex you, he'll judo throw you, and on the ground, he's an absolute whiz. I mean, like I said, he's the prototypical Dagestani fighter. All these guys have looked absolutely spectacular, and this guy's just going to, he's going to continue the trend.
I agree with you. And the last fight of these early prelims feature a UFC veteran who usually rocks a mullet. It will be taking place in the welterweight division. Mike Quicksand Pyle holds a professional record of 26 wins, 10 losses, and 1 draw, and will be a plus 235 underdog to a man who is 13 years younger than he is. Chaos Colby Covington is a perfect 7-0 in his professional career, and the line sits right now at he is minus 275 favorite. Do you think that Chaos Colby will stay undefeated?
Colby Covington, he's got some very, very strong wrestling credentials. He's an NCAA All-American, a 2-time Pac-10 champ, and he's looking better every single fight, but he's very, very inexperienced. Some people say he's the next Chris Weidman, but it's definitely way too early to tell. Now, he brings in a very, very good blast double, but he's extremely green in the stand-up department. The way he sets up his takedowns is he'll throw a high kick, and then he'll shoot for that blast double. That's all he's done in his past 2 UFC fights. So we got to see if he's changed up his approach at all. Now, he trains at ATT, so he's getting better every single day. But he's taking up a huge step up in competition. I mean, he's going from Enyang Wong and Wagner Silva to Mike Pyle. That's literally like going from rookie to pro on the video game. It's like skipping that intermediate level. and it might be too much too soon. There's always that chance he can exploit the declining Pyle, but the price is way too high to bet. Now, as far as Mike Pyle's concerned, he's a bona fide veteran of the sport. He's at the end of his career, but he's still very savvy. He loses by KO, but it's the guys like Jordan Meehan, Matt Browne, Rory McDonald, Jake Ellenberger, and Colby does not possess the stand-up of those guys. Pyle actually has 16 wins by submission and only 6 by KO, but in 4 out of his last 5 wins, he's knocked his opponent out. Now, I can see him potentially catching Covington with a big knee, maybe even a sub. The thing with Pyle is when things don't go his way, he kind of folds a little bit. But Colby doesn't have that kind of KO power. Maybe he can get it done via ground and pound, but I really think Pyle is too crafty and just the better fighter at this point in their careers. So for that reason, I got Mike Pyle via knockout.
Is it a dog or pass situation?
In my opinion, yes. However, I just can't bet on Mike Pyle for the reasons I mentioned. He's declining. He's at the end of his career. And Colby Covington is definitely going to be the hungrier guy. It's just a matter of, will that translate on the day of the fight? Because he really is taking such a huge step up in competition. You know, he's not the full package yet. He only has incredible wrestling, but this isn't a wrestling match. So we really got to see what happens on Saturday. I'm going to be enjoying this fight for sure, and I think Mike Pyle is going to get the victory.
So no units, and neither guy, I think, deserves to be on your Kountermove team. But if you're playing UFC Pick'em, join the Flyin squad and play UFC Pick'em, and let's put Mike Pyle on our UFC Pick'em. The next fight is the first of 4 fights scheduled to be broadcast on Fox Sports 1, beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Thug Rose Namajunas makes her first appearance since a failed attempt to gain the UFC Women's Strawweight Championship and is on a 2-fight losing streak officially. But she is a minus 300 favorite over the plus 250 underdog Nina Vastrina Anserov, who has a professional record of 6 wins with 4 losses. Thug Rose won the first 3 fights of her professional career. Do you think that she gets back to her winning ways?
You know, Nina Anserov, she's actually a 3rd-degree black belt in Taekwondo. So obviously she looks to keep the fight standing, but she's won by armbar before, so she does have a relatively well-rounded game. She trains out of ATT, and in her last fight, she lost a very tough decision to Juliana Lima, in which she got taken down almost every round, but she fought tough. Now, she's possibly a live dog, but I'm honestly not willing to bet on either party in this fight. Now, Rose Namajunas, she really seemed to turn a corner on her season of The Ultimate Fighter. You know, she submitted Randa Marcos, who was a standout of that show. And what Rose brings to the table is unorthodox stand-up techniques. She's a black belt in Taekwondo and karate, and she has very crafty submissions. She's also extremely lengthy for that weight class. So, you know, when she's on her back, she can submit you with something you don't see coming. Now, when it came to the season finale, she actually lost to Carla Esparza and looks completely out of her element. She got finished by Carla Esparza. So I'm not really sure where her mindset's at. She's so young. She's 22 years old. And at minus 300, I absolutely cannot bet on her. I'm definitely passing on the bet. But I guess on my UFC Pick'em team, I'm probably going to pick Rose Namajunas.
I'm going to put Rose Namajunas on my UFC Pick'em team as a decision because I just can't usually count on the women to get a finish, although we have been seeing the strawweight division women get quite a few finishes lately. I just don't think it's going to happen. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it could happen via submission, but you know what? Anserov is tough, man, so I can definitely see a decision here. We'll just have to see how it plays out.
Next, we're going to move on to the first of 2 middleweight fights scheduled to take place on this card. Uriah Primetime Hall has a professional record of 11 wins with 4 losses and is a minus 365 favorite over a plus 305 underdog, Rafael Sapo Natal. Sapo has a professional record of 19 wins, 6 losses, and 1 draw. In my opinion, Uriah Hall has more potential and will have a 3-inch reach advantage. That's not an opinion, that's fact. But I do not know if he will live up to his potential in this fight. What do you think?
You know, Uriah Hall, he's an extremely talented striker, and he's a very athletic fighter. He's a 2nd-degree black belt in Tiger Schulman's martial arts, and he's a black belt in Kyokushin karate. When he's on, he can be one of the best in the world. He almost has an aura about him when he's striking. He's got a very, very diverse striking arsenal, big kicks, hard straight punches. almost has Anderson Silva-like head movement. He throws some spinning kicks, and he's got some serious knockout power. He's actually fought some very elite competitions, such as Chris Weidman, and he went to a majority decision with Costa Philippou. He's so talented that sometimes he's kind of nice to his opponents. It's like he feels bad in there. And then sometimes he taunts his opponents like Anderson Silva and Roy Jones Jr. You never really know what to expect with him. But when he shows up, he can be world class. And when he knocks people out, it's absolutely brutal. And you know what? He's actually got a lot of heart, too. Against Thiago Santos, his toe was basically falling off, and he had zero quit in him. He kept fighting, and he ended up getting the W. Now, Rafael Natal, he's a Renzo Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's a Phil Nurse Muay Thai student, and he's also a Mendez boxing student. So he trains out of some great camps. Now, in most of his fights, he starts strong and fades late, but recently he's made some big improvements. Against Tom Watson, he looked like a completely new man. Now, people often overlook Tom Watson. People act like he's not that great of a fighter. But you know what? Tom Watson beat Sam Alvey. Tom Watson went to a split decision with Brad Tavares, and Natal absolutely dominated him. Now, one thing I got to point out, Natal's chin is not the best. He's been KO'd by Andrew Craig, by Tim Kennedy. So if Uriah lands one, he can for sure get a devastating KO. So it's either going to be Uriah doing his thing on the feet and landing that knockout, or Rafael Natal is going to grind him out. But I think Uriah is going to be able to keep this fight standing and not get grinded, and I think he's going to win in devastating fashion. But the price is too high, so no bet.
I agree that he's going to win, but it's too difficult to predict which version of Uriah Hall will show up, like you said, and for that reason, I am not putting him on my Kountermove team, but I am going with him on my UFC pick'em.
Yeah, it might be a dog or pass situation, but I can't bet on someone with a chin like Natal or someone who starts strong and historically fades late. So I do have to pick Uriah Hall on my fantasy team.
Agreed? And during the next fight, social media will likely be full of jokes about male genitalia. The stun gun Dong Young Kim takes on the People's Warrior, Josh Burkman. Kim is the favorite at minus 280, bringing with him a professional record of 19 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. Burkman is a plus 240 underdog with a record of 28 wins and 10 losses. Both men are coming off of losses, but based on Burkman's last defeat, I'm kind of surprised that he's the underdog here. What are your thoughts on this fight?
Dong Young Kim, he's a UFC veteran. He's a very tough grappler. He's extremely heavy in the top position. He knows how to grind and get the victory. Lately, he's really made a point of wanting to be more exciting, and he's gotten kind of reckless with a stand-up. It paid off against Eric Silva and John Hathaway, who he brutally knocked out, both of them, but it backfired big time against Woodley. Now, against Woodley, he threw that spinning back fist, and Woodley countered instantly and put him out cold. So we got to see how Kim recovers from such a brutal KO. Will he go back to his grinding style, or will he keep doing that wild brawling attack with the spinning back fists and nonstop forward pressure? Too many question marks for me to bet on. Now, as far as Josh Burkman's concerned, he's also a UFC vet, but he hasn't really looked the best lately either. He fought very tough against Lombard, but he still clearly lost the fight. Now, he's a potential live dog if he can catch Kim, but you can't bank on him catching Kim. He's definitely made improvements in all areas of his game. I mean, John Fitch used to be a guy that was notorious for not being able to get choked out, and Josh Burkman choked him out cold. And this is after Damian Maia had John Fitch's back for three straight rounds and couldn't choke him out. Josh Burkman choked him out in under a minute. He also KO'd Aaron Simpson, so he's been fighting UFC veterans outside of the UFC. But there's that chance that Kim's going to grind him out. So as far as betting is concerned, it is dog or pass, but I got to go with Kim here for fantasy. He usually only loses to top 10 guys, and Burkman isn't a top 10 guy.
One thing that I want to point out about this fight and Josh Burkman's last defeat was Josh Burkman hung right in there with a juiced-up Hector Lombard, and to me, he looked pretty good in defeat. And because of that, the line on Burkman seems intriguing to me. But you say we're passing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely dog or pass. I don't fault anyone for taking a stab on the dog here. Just for me personally, I can't do it because, in my opinion, Josh Burkman hasn't proven that he can beat a top 10 guy. So for that reason, I have to pass. And not only that, Dong Young Kim usually wins these kind of fights.
So we're going to pass on units on this fight. We're going to pass on Kountermove. Nobody's going on the Kountermove team from this fight, but you're going to pick the dong on the UFC Pick'em. I think that I'm going to go with Berkman on my UFC Pick'em. I'm not really sure, but let's move on to the main event of the prelims. It is so fun on paper that people might call it magical. Fun size Zach Makhachev is a hefty plus 400 underdog to the magician John Dodson for this flyweight matchup. Makhachev, who has a professional record of 19 wins with 4 losses, comes into this contest having won his last fight over fellow Resurrection Fighting Alliance alumni Tim Elliott. The minus 500 favorite, John Dodson, has lost only 6 times, and if he can win this one, he will add 1 victory to his already 17 wins and could have another title shot against Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Does the magician get this win and pull another title shot out of his hat?
He should. John Dodson, he's got the scariest knockout of any flyweight in UFC history. I mean, this guy can literally knock out anyone in that weight class. Now, what he does is he usually kind of bounces around and runs around the ring for a little bit and is a bit inactive. But once he decides to throw, he is absolutely devastating on the feet. And he can also get right back up when he gets taken down. He gave Demetrius Johnson arguably the toughest test of his entire UFC career. Props to Johnson because he came back and he put it on Dodson in the last couple rounds. But at first there, it seemed like we were going to have a new champion. Dodson dropped him a couple times. Now, as far as his opponent Makhachev is concerned, he's a Division I wrestler. So he's got the credentials, but that hasn't necessarily always translated to victories inside the octagon. Against Jussier Formiga, who's not a Division I wrestler, Formiga out-wrestled him. It was absolutely bizarre. He was getting taken down at will for the first 2 rounds and controlled on the ground. But since then, he had a very dominant decision victory over Tim Elliott, where he seemed to take his grappling to that next level. He trains under Firas Zahabi, the TriStar coach, who's one of the best in the industry. So he's going to come here with a very good game plan. He's not going to stand and bang with John Dodson. But he's probably going to get his takedown stuffed. And if that's the case, Dodson might knock him out. Now, if Makhachev is able to get some takedowns, he can foreseeably get the upset, but only if he holds him down for all 15 minutes. I just don't see that happening. So I have to go with Dodson here. But minus 500 is way too high of a price to play. Now, you also got to take into consideration that John Dodson's been out for almost a year, maybe even more than a year, with his knee injury. So you don't know if he's going to come back the same. What if he doesn't have the same spring in his step, which he always relies on because he's always bouncing back and forth, and he's almost like a karate guy, not in terms of his stance, but in terms of how he leaps in and out. He's just such a fast, explosive guy with huge knockout power. So if he can keep this fight standing, I definitely think he's going to get the victory. It's just that, like I said before, that layoff, it's such a question mark, and Zach Makhachev, he's been very active, so we just got to see what happens. I'm going to sit back and enjoy this one, but I'm definitely picking John Dodson in my fantasy.
Passing with the units, putting John Dodson on their UFC Pick'em team, and me, based on that amazing KO power that you just said, and based on this being a flyweight fight, which they're usually fast-paced, you're going to hear this from me a lot, I'm putting John Dodson on my Kountermove team.
Yeah, I don't blame you, Brian. He's had very, very good results in the UFC, and I think this will be another victory for him.
I sure do hope so, because you and I are going to compete against each other in the Kountermove, and I really want that win. But finally, we make our way onto the pay-per-view portion of this card, and it is scheduled to start at 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Pacific time, and we will stay at 125 pounds. Joseph Benavidez has an impressive professional record of 21 wins with 4 losses and will be the largest betting favorite on this card at minus 650 over the plus 475 underdog John Moraga, who has a professional record of 16 wins with just 3 losses. I think that the Southpaw Benavidez gets the job done in this one. Do you agree with me?
Joseph Benavidez, he's one of these guys that will beat every single person in that division except the champion. And when he beats guys, lately, it's been absolutely devastating. Ever since Team Alpha Male got Dwayne Bang Ludwig as their coach, they've been knocking guys out. And Benavidez, he's included in that. He's been knocking guys out with shots to the head, shots to the body. He's got an incredible guillotine choke. But the only thing about Joseph Benavidez is that I'm not sure where his mindset's at. He went 5 rounds with Demetrius Johnson, and he got absolutely dominated. I have no clue how that was a split decision because I scored it 4 rounds to 1 for Johnson. And then in the rematch, he got knocked out in under 2 minutes. So you got to question if he thinks he can win that belt. And your mentality is a huge part of fighting. Now, in John Moraga's case, he also fought Demetrius Johnson. And you know what? Even though he lost, it was a spirited battle. So you can foreseeably say that John Moraga still has title aspirations and Joseph Benavidez doesn't. I know for a fact that Joseph Benavidez is probably kind of on the fence about facing Mighty Mouse again just because of what happened the last 2 times. So for that reason, I think John Moraga is going to be the hungrier guy. Now, you just got to take this into consideration. Yeah, Benavidez might be a little bit better than him, but minus 650? That's absolutely insane. This fight's way closer than the line indicates. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go with John Moraga here. And I don't fault anyone for taking a stab on the dog here. And you asked me at the beginning of the show, am I going to wait for the weigh-ins for any of the fights? And I said no. I'm changing my mind. I'm going to wait for the weigh-ins for this fight because there is a chance I'm going to put 1 unit on John Moraga. I'm not quite sure yet. It's just minus 650. I really think Moraga is being completely underestimated. He's a very tough guy. He hits extremely hard, and he's a very, very savvy vet too. When he fought Justin Scoggins, yeah, he was getting taken down, but he was working submissions off his back, and eventually he caught Scoggins in a very, very nice high elbow guillotine with that 10-finger grip, and that's some very high-level stuff. And while I don't think he's going to choke out Benavidez, who, he trains out of Alpha Male, and those guys are known for their guillotine chokes and their choke defense, I do think there's a chance he can be the hungrier guy and potentially steal the decision. So we're just going to have to see how it plays out. I'm going to pick Moraga. I understand why people are picking Benavidez, but I'm going to just say don't put Benavidez in your parlays. The price is way too high. There's no value in it. The value's on the dog here, so dog or pass.
So this is really interesting. For the first time ever on this show, I think, you and I completely disagree on how this fight's going to go. I kind of like that, actually. I was going to talk about Scoggins as well. He took Moraga down over and over, but just kept putting his head in there for Moraga to get the guillotine. And I do not think that Benavidez is going to have similar issues. But do you think that's kind of nice that we finally disagree on something?
Yeah, it's awesome. And let's break this fight down a little bit more. When John Moraga fought John Dodson, yeah, it did end via doctor stoppage, but that was a bit controversial in itself. John Moraga was actually hanging in there tough with John Dodson. It was very competitive until the end of the second round. I mean, John Dodson wasn't kicking his ass by any means at all. What happened was at the very end of the second round, Dodson actually landed a head kick which broke Moraga's nose, and the doctor didn't let him continue. So it was kind of unfortunate because we wanted to see what was going to happen at the end of that fight. Now, as far as Benavidez is concerned, he doesn't bounce around like John Dodson. He's actually a little bit more flat-footed. In his fight with Dustin Ortiz, he was actually backpedaling a bit, but his counter-fighting abilities are very on point. However, I think John Moraga is a lot more technical on the feet than Dustin Ortiz. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. I could totally see John Moraga pressing forward and Benavidez backpedaling a bit, but Benavidez could definitely counter him with something. The thing is that Benavidez isn't the most technical striker. He doesn't set up his strikes the best. He just hits with very, 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 very hard power. So Moraga's going to have to look out for that power and that speed of Benavidez. But Moraga's a very tough guy, and he can pull it off.
So to your credit, I saw earlier today on Twitter that Joseph Benavidez said that he prefers to hit his opponents with body shots, and he would prefer to get a body shot TKO over a head punch or kick TKO or KO because he prefers to hit them in the body where they can really feel it and then not punch them in the head where punching them in the head gives them brain damage. So like you said, with where his head is at, if he's worrying about giving his opponent brain damage, maybe he isn't in the fight mentally.
Yeah, I can't believe he said that. That's very nice of him. That's very thoughtful of him. And I can tell you right now, for a fact, John Moraga doesn't feel that way. He wants to take out Joseph Benavidez. And one thing I actually forgot that I need to mention right now, John Moraga has been training with Henry Cejudo. He brought in Henry Cejudo to emulate Joseph Benavidez. And while Henry Cejudo doesn't have the experience of Joseph Benavidez, you can definitely say he's way more technical than Joe B. So we're going to have to see how that translates on Saturday night. I definitely think there's a chance for the upset here. Now, if this was minus 200 for Joseph Benavidez, okay, I can understand that. But minus 650, they're completely disrespecting John Moraga.
Bringing in Henry Cejudo, that is a great point, and you almost swayed me to pick Moraga, but we're both passing on the money. We're both passing on the counter move for these guys, and you are putting Moraga on your UFC pick'em. I'm going with Benavidez, but at this moment, we need to talk about the one and only heavyweight fight on this card. The 6'6" Travis "Hapa" Browne has a professional record of 17 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. He will be a minus 450 favorite and might have a slight weight advantage over the plus 360 underdog Andre Pitbull Arlovsky, who is 23-10 with 1 no contest. When the big boys butt heads, it often ends early. How do you see this one playing out?
You know, it's interesting because 9 times out of 10, I would pick Travis Browne by KO, but there's actually a little bit of a backstory here. They're actually really good friends, and they used to train together at Jackson's. You know, Travis Browne recently moved to Glendale Fight Club with Edmund Tarverdian, but there's a story that actually came out earlier today where Travis Browne was in the corner of Andre Arlovsky when he fought Anthony Rumble Johnson. And if you recall, Anthony Johnson broke Arlovsky's jaw in the first round, but Arlovsky was saved by the bell. And Travis Browne says that he actually picked up Andre Arlovsky's tooth off the canvas between rounds. And then, you know, he applauded Arlovsky for the heart he showed to continue that fight with his jaw broken. So Arlovsky's got a lot of heart. Now, the thing with Travis Browne is he's a very, very talented and athletic guy. And he hits super hard, man. He can really knock out anyone in that weight class. Now, he can be a bit sloppy at times, and he can get a little cocky in there. You know, he'll throw, like, some flying kicks and stuff like that, and it's actually proved to be a detriment at times. In his fight with Bigfoot Silva, he lost because he threw one of those, you know, flying front kicks, and then he dislocated his knee. So, you know, it proved to be a detriment. However, since then, he's really turned a corner. He's won 4 out of his last 5 by KO, and the only loss was against Fabricio Werdum, where he went 5 tough rounds. And Fabricio Werdum took him to school, but that's the interim champion, you know? And since then, Travis Browne completely changed his life. He moved over to Glendale Fight Club with Edmund Tarverdian, and he's been working his hands a lot. You know, in his last fight against Brendan Schaub, he knocked him out in the first round, which was expected, but the way he did it, in my opinion, was impressive. I know a lot of people weren't impressed with it, but I was, and I'll tell you why. When Brendan Schaub ran in there to throw a big overhand right, Travis Browne countered him with a very nice uppercut. And Brendan Schaub's supposed to be a jiu-jitsu guy, but Travis Browne had 0 problems back-mounting him and subsequently pounding him out for the first-round TKO. Now, if you remember, Brendan Schaub and Andre Arlovsky fought to a very ugly split decision. So MMA math, yeah, it doesn't work, but what I can infer from that fight is that Arlovsky and Brendan Schaub, at this point in their careers, they're around the same level. That fight could have gone either way. And Travis Browne is heads above both of them. The only thing is that they are friends. Arlovsky and Browne, they're boys. So we got to see if they respect each other and maybe high-five and hug and do stuff that you don't want to happen. You know, for example, when Wonder Boy fought Cote, he dropped Cote, but instead of finishing him off, he helped him back up and gave him a hug and a high-five because it's his friend. And that's absolutely ridiculous. So as long as Travis Browne doesn't act like his friend inside the ring, he's going to probably knock out Andre Arlovsky. So I am putting Travis Browne on my counter move team.
A little more on that Fabricio Werdum versus Travis Browne fight. If I remember correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong here, I think that Travis Browne hurt his arm, one of his arms, in the first round against Werdum. And that's Travis Browne's biggest game, is some long-ass, really powerful uppercuts. And if you got an injured arm against a guy like Fabricio Werdum and then still go to a decision, that's pretty impressive in defeat, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I can't confirm or deny if it was his arm, but I know for a fact that he broke his rib in the first round, and he kept going all 5 rounds. He took his whooping like a man in that one. So you got to applaud him for that. Now, as far as Arlovsky's concerned, he's definitely turned his career around. There was a little moment there when he had lost 3 out of 4 fights by KO, and people were calling for him to retire. And since then, he went on a big streak, man. He's actually put together 2-fight win streak inside the UFC where he beat Brendan Schaub, as we mentioned, but that fight was controversial. It could have gone either way. And then he knocked out Bigfoot Silva in the first round. So now he gets this step up in Travis Browne, and I think this is going to be the end of the run for Andrei Arlovsky. I really do think that if Travis Browne comes in focused and the friendship doesn't hinder his performance, he's going to knock out Andrei Arlovsky.
So you think he's going to knock out Andrei Arlovsky, and you're putting him on your Kountermove team. Now we each have 2 fighters on our Kountermove team with only 3 fights to go on this card, which means we will likely have 1 guy from each of the remaining fights on our team. Donald the Cowboy Cerrone is a Budweiser drinking, thrill chasing, wild man who could get a title shot if he improves his record from 27-6 to 28-6 and chalk up his impressive 8th victory in a row if he beats the 13-3 John the Bull Makhachev. As we record this, Cowboy is minus 550 and the Bull is plus 425. These guys both have a knack for finishing fights. Do you think we will see a finish, and which man will be the victor?
I do. At this point, you can say Donald Cowboy Cerrone is a legend. He's had so many classic fights in the WEC and in the UFC, and there was one point in his career where you thought that, yeah, maybe he's not going to get that title shot. Maybe he only beats the perennial top 10 guys, but he can't beat the champions. But you know what? He put on a 7-fight win streak, which he is currently on right now, and he's making a case that he might be ready for that title shot. Now, what he brings to the table is very, very good Muay Thai. I mean, when this guy kicks your legs, you feel it. He has a very nice 1-2 to the leg kick, which is corner calls for nicely, and he listens to his corner very, very well. And also, on the ground, he can tap anybody out, whether it's a rear naked choke, a triangle choke. He's actually won 15 of his fights by submission and only 4 by knockout, but he's known as a striker. But what he usually does is he'll drop guys and then tap them out. So he's got a very, very well-rounded game. Now, as far as Makhachev is concerned, he's more of a Taekwondo guy. And you know what? In his last fight, he was coming off a year layoff, and then he knocked out Shane Campbell in the first round. And Shane Campbell, he's actually a K1 vet, so he's got some Muay Thai, in his own right. I definitely think that Cowboy Cerrone is better than Shane Campbell. So what I think is going to happen is that, like in many of Cowboy's fights, I think he's going to probably get tagged early. Cowboy doesn't use a lot of head movement. He stands up very straight. He's very easy to hit. So I think Makhachev is probably going to tag him early, but after that, Cowboy's going to chop him down with leg kicks. He might drop him with a straight punch or a head kick, and I think that Cowboy's going to tap him out with a choke. So if you're considering betting on this fight, you could probably throw Cowboy in your parlay, but the line is a bit high for my liking. But one thing I was eyeing was the under in this fight, because I expected it to be under 1.5 rounds, but it's actually under 2.5 rounds. So that's a lot better. There's more value in that, and it's plus money. So you might want to consider taking a stab on the under in this fight. I don't think that John Makhachev is going to knock him out, but if Makhachev wins, it will be by KO. I just don't see it happening, because Cowboy, he only loses to the best of the best. Rafael dos Anjos, Anthony Pettis, those are the last 2 lightweight champions. And Cowboy doesn't lose to guys that aren't the best of the best. Now, Makhachev is good, but he's not top 5, he's not top 10. So I fully expect Cowboy to get a finish here. And I'm putting Cowboy on my Kountermove team.
I am putting Cowboy on my Kountermove team as well. And as you said, because he is too steep, I'm avoiding a bet, but also because he is one of my favorite fighters, I'm passing on the bet because it is irresponsible to bet with your heart. And so since he's one of my favorite fighters, probably in the top 10, I got to pass on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's good to not bet emotionally, but I do think Cowboy's going to get the victory here.
I can hardly believe this next fight is finally fucking going to happen. The co-main event of UFC 187 is the long-awaited middleweight title fight between the All-American Chris Weidman and Vitor the Phenom Belfort. This fight really needs no introduction from me, so let's just get right into it. Daniel, tell us exactly how you see this fight playing out.
Vitor Belfort is an absolute legend of the sport. I mean, this guy won the UFC heavyweight tournament at UFC 12. And then he won the UFC light heavyweight championship at UFC 46. So, I mean, this guy's been fighting forever. And what he does best is brutally knocking guys out. You know, he's won 17 fights by knockout. And what he does is he literally blitzes guys with 20-punch combos and knocks them out senseless. He's one of the best KO artists in the entire history of mixed martial arts. Now, in addition to that, he's also a black belt in jiu-jitsu and judo. So if you take this guy to the ground, there's a chance that he's going to rip your arm off. In the first round against John Jones, he literally hyperextended his arm with that arm bar. And if it wasn't due to John Jones' heart, he would have won the belt that night. Now, in terms of the present, since that fight, he's totally changed his game, if that's even possible. He's still knocking guys out, but the way he's doing it now is via head kicks. You know, he threw a big head kick on Michael Bisping, and then he had a spinning heel kick against Luke Rockhold, and then another head kick against Dan Henderson. So he knocked out 3 top 10 guys at the time, all in a row, and he deserved his title shot. Now, the thing you got to take into consideration here is that during that 3-fight streak, he was actually on the TRT, the testosterone replacement therapy. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It was legal at the time. However, it's not legal anymore. So he's off of it, most likely. And the pictures I've seen of him, he's looking a bit deflated, man. So we're going to have to see how that plays into his confidence and his mindset and his overall abilities. But if there's one thing for sure, his technical abilities aren't going to be diminished. He's still going to, be a very sharp fighter, very technical on the feet. And if he catches Weidman, he can knock him out. I just don't think that's going to happen. Now, Chris Weidman, this guy's an absolute stud, man. And, I was one of the people that counted him out against Anderson Silva. I thought it's too soon. He's not ready. He doesn't have any striking. And boy, was I wrong. He went in there against Anderson Silva, and not only did he win, he knocked out the greatest fighter of all time. Now, yeah, Anderson Silva has lost some fights in the past, but they were all controversial losses. He lost by DQ. He lost by flying scissor heel hook. I mean, he lost by very random, not definite losses. Lost by a split decision in the first fight of his career. So with all those losses, you could still be like, yeah, he's the greatest of all time. He hasn't truly lost. But guess what? Against Chris Weidman, he truly lost. Chris Weidman went in there and knocked him out. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, but Anderson Silva was clowning. Yeah, maybe he was clowning a little bit, but guess what? He was clowning his entire career. It's not like he just started on the Chris Weidman fight. I mean, just go back and watch his fight against Damian Maia, his fight against Forrest Griffin, even some of his fights before he was in the UFC. It's not that he's clowning. It's that his style is to get inside people's heads and make them think that they don't belong in there with him. And Weidman believes in himself so much. He's got such mental fortitude that the clowning didn't really affect him that much. He still got the job done. Now, obviously, there was a rematch because Anderson is the greatest of all time. And in the first fight, the one area of success that Anderson had was with the leg kicks. So one of the coaches at Chris Weidman, John Danaher, he actually said, you got kicked way too much. We need to address this. So what Ray Longo had Chris Weidman doing was he was working on his leg checks during that entire camp. Now, Ray Longo, he's an old school badass. He's actually broken a couple dudes' legs with checks. So when Anderson fought Chris for the second time and Anderson tried to throw those kicks at Chris Weidman, the first time Anderson actually broke his foot on a check, but then the next time he broke his leg, and it was devastating. Now, a lot of people think that's a fluke, but I'm here to tell you that's not a fluke because Chris Weidman trained that technique all camp long. Now, I have a personal challenge for anyone listening to this that thinks that was a fluke. Go sign up to an MMA gym for 1 week only, take the Muay Thai class, and then let me know what it's like when you start checking some kicks or getting your leg kicks checked. Because anyone that's ever fought or trained before knows that shin-on-shin contact is one of the most painful feelings in the entire world. And not only did he check his kick perfectly in terms of timing, he checked it on the right spot and broke his leg. It was gruesome for the fans to watch, but it was a very effective technique. So you got to give credit where credit's due. Now, prior to that injury, Chris Weidman got a 10-8 first round against Anderson. He dropped him, and he actually knocked him out in the first round. But what happened was he woke him back up with punches, so the ref didn't even notice it. So Anderson had a concussion in the first round, and then he comes out in the second round, and he was very frustrated and throwing wild kicks, and Chris Weidman capitalized and checked that kick. Now, people still thought it was a fluke, and then he goes in there and goes 5 hard rounds with a prime Lyoto Machida and beat him at his own game. He beat him standing up, and he also took the fight to the ground and beat him up there. It was a very well-rounded game. Now, in around the 4th or 5th round, Weidman actually underestimated Lyoto's will to win, and he ate a couple shots as a result. But Weidman's got so much heart. He's so tough that he literally signaled to Lyoto, "Is that all you got? Come on, man. Let's keep fighting." And Weidman went on to win a very dominant unanimous decision. It won fight of the night. Now, in terms of his fight with Vitor, I do think that Weidman can keep the fight standing because he uses his rangy strikes very well. He knows how to manage his distance very effectively. He also hits extremely hard. However, I don't think that he's going to stand with him for extended periods of time. I think he's going to mix his striking to his takedowns very effectively. And once he gets on top of Vitor, he's going to land some serious ground and pound. I'm pretty damn sure he's going to be able to avoid the subs off his back. You know, Chris Weidman does have better grappling credentials than John Jones. And if you recall, Chris Weidman actually faced Andre Galvão, who's one of the best Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys in the entire world, in a grappling match, and he didn't get tapped out. He went the full distance with him. So that says a lot about the level of Chris Weidman's ground game, and not to mention he knocked out Anderson Silva, so his stand-up's not half bad either. So I think that Chris Weidman is going to make a statement, and he's going to finish that era of the Brazilian middleweight legends. You know, Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, now Vitor Belfort. He's going to get that under his belt, and he's going to take a very dominant victory here. So I do have Chris Weidman on my Kountermove team, and the price is a bit high to play straight, but I don't blame anyone for putting Chris Weidman in their parlays.
I'm going to try to wipe away the tears from you talking about Anderson the Spider Silva against Chris Weidman. Anderson the Spider Silva is my favorite fighter of all time, and I damn near broke down and cried for both of those damn losses, but I think I'll be able to make it through this podcast. Like you said about Chris Weidman's mental fortitude and Anderson Silva not being able to get into his head, you're right. That was Anderson's game for a long time, and that's why I liked him. It was showy. It was fun to watch. Also, when he danced to the cage as Michael Jackson, that stuff was fun. But he was unable to get into Chris Weidman's head because of, like you said, Chris Weidman's mental fortitude. And because of that, I thought that Chris was going to beat Vitor before they took Vitor Belfort off of TRT. And now that TRT Vitor is now TNT Vitor, as he calls himself, I think that Chris Weidman is going to run through Vitor, and I also have the All-American on my Kountermove team.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, it could definitely happen. You know, we got to take into consideration that Vitor Belfort trains out of a great camp. You know, the Black Zillions, they've really turned things around. And, you know, he's brought in glory strikers such as Rico Verhoeven, who's one of the best in the world, Nieki Holskin. So he's working with incredible fighters. And like I said, his technique's going to be on point, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think that Weidman's probably going to be like a Mack truck here, and he's going to kind of run through him. But you can't count out a guy like Vitor Belfort, but I have to pick Chris Weidman inside the distance.
Yeah, like you said, the TRT isn't responsible for Vitor's technique, but you got to think that TRT was somewhat responsible for the velocity with which he threw that spinning heel kick on Luke Rockhold and the power that he hit both Bisping and Dan Henderson with.
Yeah, it could very well be. You know, Vitor's been knocking guys out his entire career, and like you said, the TRT didn't give him the technique to throw that spin, but maybe it definitely it helped the velocity and the impact that it has. So we're going to have to see what happens here. I do think that if he throws one of those kicks at Weidman, Weidman's going to probably eat it and keep coming forward. And that kind of stuff breaks guys. And if you've seen in the past, you can break Vitor Belfort. I mean, just go back to his title fights with Randy Couture and, with John Jones. And so he's been broken in the past, and I've never seen Weidman broken ever. So, yeah, man, Weidman all day.
Weidman on both of our Kountermove teams. I'm just fucking jacked that fight is finally going to happen. It's been canceled like 3 times, and Saturday at UFC 187, it's finally going to happen. For the next fight, I'm going to try and avoid all of Johnny Bones Jones talk and just look forward to this main event because it is for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship of the world. After moving up a few weight classes, Anthony Rumble Johnson has had a career resurgence. He now has a professional record of 19 wins and 4 losses and is on a crazy 9-fight, 3-division winning streak and has earned a chance at UFC Gold. His opponent, Daniel DC Cormier, has only 1 blemish on his record, and that loss came at the hands of arguably the greatest fighter of all time. I know we said that Anderson Silva was the greatest, but maybe John Jones is the greatest. The money line on this contest is a near pick'em with Rumble as a slight underdog. He is currently plus 115. Who do you see becoming the first new UFC light heavyweight champion in over 4 years?
Rumble Johnson. But let's talk about Daniel Cormier for a second. Cormier, he's an absolute stud, man. He's an Olympic wrestler. Now, let's just clarify this for a second. He didn't place in the Olympics. He actually got 4th place. But he still made it to the Olympics, so that counts for something. Only a handful of individuals get to do something like that. And he's also not a champion wrestler either because he lost to Cael Sanderson in his match. So if you notice, there's kind of a trend here where he comes in 2nd place. I know it's 4th place in the Olympics, but what I'm trying to say here is that he doesn't win the big fight. Now, what he does bring to the table is, he hits very hard and he transitions his strikes to his takedowns very effectively. In Strikeforce, he absolutely dominated Josh Barnett. And at the time, Josh Barnett was one of the baddest dudes on the planet. And if you recall, DC picked that guy up and slammed him hard, man. And you know what? He knocked out Bigfoot Silva back when Bigfoot Silva was on the TRT looking big and strong. And he threw around Dan Henderson. But Dan Henderson was a 44-year-old man. And all the guys that Daniel Cormier has beat, while they are big names, none of them are young athletic guys in their prime. And the one time he did fight an athletic guy in their prime was John Jones. And, prior to the fight, Cormier was like, if I want to take John Jones down 10 times, I'm going to take him down 10 times. And then you know what happened? He didn't even take him down 1 time. Yeah, he kind of had a little bit of a takedown in the 4th round, but John got right back up. So, it was actually more of a discouraging moment for DC. And DC was the one that got taken down about 5 times in that fight by John Jones, who doesn't have anywhere near the wrestling credentials that DC has. John Jones was a JUCO champion wrestler. He wasn't an Olympic wrestler. Anthony Johnson is also a JUCO champion wrestler. But to stay on DC for a sec, he's never beat an athletic guy in their prime. All the guys he beat were, older and slower. And one thing I want to point out is that when DC was at heavyweight, he was the smaller guy, so he actually had that speed advantage. And, when he beat Frank Mir and Roy Nelson, he was just way faster than them. And, he could grind out that decision, mixing in his striking, his takedowns, and his full game. But Anthony Rumble Johnson, when this guy was fighting at 170, he would devastatingly knock people out. But the thing is that he completely depleted himself trying to make that weight. I mean, the guy's so damn huge that he shouldn't have been at 170 in the first place. But he still had some, relatively decent results. But he kept missing weight, and, eventually he lost his job. In his fight against Vitor Belfort, he missed weight by like 12 pounds. And, so he completely depleted himself, and he said he almost died making the weight that time. He said he couldn't feel his leg. So he got choked out in the 1st round. And he said on the flight home, him and his coach, Henry Hooft, they got drunk, drinking wine, and they said, I'm going to turn my career around. I'm going to do whatever you tell me, and let's see what happens. So ever since that time, Rumble's put on a 9-fight win streak. And not only has he been knocking guys out, he's been knocking out some top-level competition. One doesn't simply KO Alexander Gustafsson, and the way he did it was so beautiful. He countered the push kick with a straight right, and as soon as Rumble connects, you're in big, big trouble. Now, in his UFC debut against Phil Davis got in deep on some takedown attempts, and Rumble's sprawl was absolutely scary, man. His wrestling defense is on point because, as I mentioned, he is a JUCO champion wrestler, but he uses his wrestling in more of a counter-grappling way so that he can keep the fight standing. And he absolutely made Phil Davis look like a child in that fight. And, yeah, Phil Davis might not be the best, but guess what? Phil Davis actually got ranked in the top 5 in the UFC light heavyweight division. So you got to take it for what it's worth. Anthony Johnson, 30-27, a top 5 guy, easily, no problem, no sweat. So that was his return to the UFC. And as you may know, even though he didn't knock out Phil Davis, no one's ever knocked out Phil Davis. Machida didn't knock him out. Gustafsson didn't knock him out. Phil Davis is extremely hard to hit. But Rumble beat him up, that's for sure. And then his next fight, he takes on Minotauro Nogueira, Little Nog. And a lot of people like to write off Little Nog, but you know what? He was coming off a win over Rashad Evans. And Rumble goes in there, and he knocks him out in 44 seconds in absolutely devastating fashion. It was almost like Nogueira didn't know what he was up against. And then after that, he put it all together when he fought Alexander Gustafsson. And if you recall, Alexander Gustafsson gave John Jones the toughest fight of his career. Some people to this day still think that Alexander Gustafsson beat John Jones. And Rumble said that Gustafsson was going to give him a run for his money. He fully expected it. The fight was in Sweden, a sold-out stadium. And Rumble goes in there and knocks him out in the first round. No one's ever done that. No one's ever hurt Gustafsson like that. John Jones couldn't finish him, So this guy, he's serious. He's scary. Now, the thing I want to point out about Cormier is he's never beat a top 10 guy in the light heavyweight division. I mean, his 2 wins at 205 are against Patrick Cummings and Dan Hendo, who's, he's a legend in the sport, but at the time he's 44 years old. It's not the old school Dan Henderson who was, back when you could beat him back in the day, it really meant something. And it still means something to have that name on your resume. But what I'm trying to say is that Dan Henderson is way past his prime. And DC took, he did whoop him, but he took like 3 rounds to whoop him. I want to ask the listener something. How long do you think it would take Rumble to beat Dan Henderson? I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you'd all answer under a minute, right? Okay, exactly. What I think is going to happen here is that Anthony Rumble Johnson is going to be too athletic, too strong, too fast. I think he's going to stuff the takedowns. I think he's going to land his devastating strikes, and I think he's going to knock out Daniel Cormier. So I'm putting 4 units on Anthony Rumble Johnson. Now, when I gave this play out on Best Fight Picks on Sunday, the line was plus 125. Right now it's plus 115, and I still recommend a 4-unit play on Rumble Johnson. I think that John Jones said a quote that I'll never forget till the day I die. He said, "Second is a habit." And I really think that's going to be the case for DC. It's going to be like Kenny Florian, where he absolutely demolishes everyone he faces until he gets to that title shot. And here's where it really counts. And I really think Anthony Johnson's the hungrier guy. He wants it more. He's not going to break when things don't go his way. And DC made some comments that, yeah, Rumble got choked out at 170, and, at the core, he is who he is. And I completely disagree with that, because when he was fighting at 170, like I mentioned, he was completely depleting himself. Now he's the best possible version of himself. He's healthy, he's fully fed, and it's translating so nicely at 205 pounds. I really think DC was better off at heavyweight when he had that speed advantage. Now he doesn't have the speed advantage anymore. And I think that you're going to see Daniel Cormier mentally break in this fight. And Anthony Johnson, he's either going to get that devastating knockout or he's going to win a decision. But I definitely see Anthony Rumble Johnson becoming your new light heavyweight champion.
So like you said, Daniel Cormier always coming in second. Even if he was in the heavyweight division, he would have to come in second to his buddy, Cain Velasquez. So Daniel Cormier, always the bridesmaid and never the bride. After Rumble Johnson's victory over Little Nog, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson said Anthony Rumble Johnson will be the UFC's light heavyweight champion in 2015. And I thought Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson might have been right, even if John Jones might have still had the belt. Now he doesn't, and now it's for a vacant belt, and I think that he is definitely right. I don't know if I'm going to go that steep. That's quite a play, 4 units, but I did go with a 2-unit play on Rumble Johnson, and I was able to get it at plus 130.
Oh, wow. I'll tell you this. This is the kind of regard I hold Rumble in. When he was initially scheduled to fight John Jones, I wasn't going to bet on John Jones. And, I always bet on John Jones. Against DC, I put 5 units on John Jones. I thought for sure Jones was going to run through DC, and that's what happened. But this time I was like, this could be the guy. And I was going to pass on a bet. But now he's fighting Daniel Cormier, which that's a big step down from John Jones. I know Rumble, he's acting very humble, and he's saying stuff like, oh, it's a tougher test for me. But he knows what's up, and I really think he's going to stop DC.
So we've both got units on Rumble, young man Rumble, and we're both also putting him on my Kountermove team. Is that on our Kountermove teams? Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And listeners, put 4 units on it. Let's put our balls on the line. Let's put 4 units on it.
4 units, Anthony Rumble Johnson. It's come to the time on this show where we're going to go over Daniel's best fight picks. Give us a summary of all of the units that you're throwing on this event.
Yeah, I'm just going to do 4 units on Anthony Rumble Johnson. I think that's the way to go on this card. There is a lot of chalk. A lot of people are asking me, if I have to do a parlay, who should I put on it? Okay, if you have to do a parlay and you absolutely insist on it, I would recommend Chris Weidman, Travis Browne, and Islam Makhachev. But I'm not betting it myself, so I feel kind of weird telling you that. But I do think those 3 guys are going to win. The only thing is that there's so much chalk on this card, man, and the prices are way too high. So Anthony Rumble Johnson, that has all the value, man. Plus 125, plus 115. That's the way to go. I think he's going to win for sure. And one thing I also want to point out, maybe take a look at the under in the Cerrone versus Makdessi fight.
Under 2.5 rounds, I would put money on that. Maybe 1 unit.
Yeah, I don't go more than 1 unit, But the fact that, like I mentioned, it's 2.5 rounds, not 1.5 like I would have imagined it would be. So there's some value in that, and it's at plus money.
So as we have mentioned a few times throughout this episode of the podcast, you and I are both playing Kountermove this week for UFC 187. If you're listening to this podcast, go right now to Kountermove.com and get in on the Fantasy Sports Network's UFC 187 free roll. It is free to play, and you could possibly win $100. No money in, possible 100 out. You can't go wrong with that. Daniel, let's go over our Kountermove teams. I'll let you go first.
Okay, so on my Kountermove team, I got Anthony Rumble Johnson, Chris Weidman, Donald Cerrone, Travis Browne, and Islam Makhachev. Somehow, it fit the salary cap with all those studs on the team.
Someday, I'm hoping to talk Kountermove into giving me my own fucking game so people could win against me and get my logo like they swatted the fly or whatever, beat Flyin Brian. But for this event, I'm just going to make a free-to-play, no money back game so you can play with us and see if you can beat us. And my team is Anthony Rumble Johnson, Donald the Cowboy Cerrone, the All-American Chris Weidman, John the Magician Dodson, and Justin Tank Scoggins.
Nice, man. So we have 2 members of diversity within our team, so I like it. We'll see who the best is Saturday night, right, Brian?
That's right. Probably get over at about midnight my time on Saturday. Now we're at the end of the show. Time to do some shout-outs. What do you got, Daniel?
As always, I want to thank all the listeners of the show. All the support, all the feedback that you guys have given me, I truly appreciate it. Keep it coming. Follow me at Best Fight Picks, at DFL on Drums, at MMA Thought. I'm always down to chat MMA, UFC, fights with all you guys. So hit me up anytime, man. My family, my friends that listen to this, that support me, I love you guys. So much love. Peace out. Brian, thanks for having me as always, dude.
Love having you, Daniel. I've got 2 shout-outs before I get that. You can follow me on the Twitter at Flyin MMA. That's flying without the G, MMA. Or search for Flyin Brian. I, too, will talk to you until the day is over about MMA, about fighting, about whatever you want to talk about. I also need to thank Unique Kennels, the official bulldog of MMA, raising affordable and healthy bulldogs for the last 30 years. Look him up on Twitter at UniqueKennels71 and also on Instagram, instagram.com/Unique Kennels. I told you at the beginning of the show to go get in your daily dose of cute, and you haven't done it yet? What the hell? Go there right now. I also want to thank Reddit. Somehow last week, our podcast got uploaded to the Reddit and got us a bajillion views. So Reddit, if you're a Reddit user listening to this, I thank you so much. Daniel, that's it. I'll see you next week. We will do the next fight card, which is what?
Carlos Condit versus Thiago Alves, the return of the natural-born killer. And we also got Charles do Bronx Oliveira on there. So I can't wait to break it down. We're going to have some very good plays on that card, so tune in.
We'll see you next week, Flying Squad. Talk to you later, Daniel.
See you, Brian.
Namaste.